If you've been in the Five Nights at Freddy's community lately, you would know the week before, the novel I talked about in the last video, has been shaking up a lot of the ideas in the theorist community, and one that I mentioned was the time period in which Five Nights at Freddy's 1 takes place. The reason this has been questioned has to do with the reveal in the novel that Ralph, or Phone Guy, recorded his first set of messages around his daughter's birth, which was 11 years ago, about to be 12, which means Five Nights at Freddy's 1 must take place 12 years before this event. Despite this, a new creator on the scene, known as the Unwithered Truth, doesn't think this part of the book was ever meant to be used. Rather, using references from the media mentioned in the book, they deduce that this game is actually intended to take place in 1989. And it's fairly well made and makes incredible points. So the game takes place in 1989, right? Well, I'm not sure that's the case. I think the community has been using the right date since MatPat made a theory for it back with his very first Five Nights at Freddy's theory video, that being 1993. And no, it's not just because MatPat said it. But if that's the case, why do I think it takes place in 1993? Well, in the Silver Eyes, Charlie and company only come back to Freddy's long after it's closed, and the events of the story takes place in 1995, 10 years after the events of Freddy's. And looking back to the date we've been using all of these years, 1993 would place it 10 years after the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 4 when the bite took place. Not to mention, in FNAF 4, we can hear the FNAF 1 phone calls, just as the Silver Eyes ends up taking Charlie back to Fredbear's family diner in the novels. Both protagonists reminded back to Fredbear's after connecting with Freddy's due to a sibling being killed, that being Charlie thinking Afton killed Sammy and Michael thinking back to his little brother. Not to mention how close Mike and Charlie parallel each other a lot between the series, and I don't think it's far-fetched to assume this means Five Nights at Freddy's 1 should take place during the 90s or someplace after. We even see this in the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, with it taking place in the early 2000s and giving us the age of 25 for Mike, and having him start to dream about his younger brother, all with this theme of his brother being the thing that brought him back to Freddy's. But I want to focus on that 25 age real quick. In the story What We Found, a story about Fazbear's Fright, the event that's intended to recreate the events from back at Freddy's, Hudson, the character that's chosen to parallel Mike, is the 23-year-old Hudson Foster. This number of 23 would reappear in Vanessa's age, another character who has a lot of parallels to Michael Afton, being a night guard under the control of William, or something that thinks it's Afton. The reason this is significant is because according to the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, Mike was around 12 when Garrett went missing. If it's the same inside of the games, he would be 23 in 1993. Then, there's the story You're the Band from Fazbear Frights, which according to the story takes place 30 years after the MCI, in which a young-looking boy named Mike is taking care of Freddy's, which is fairly clearly much longer than 4 years. However, this story is weird as the mother doesn't remember when it happened, and only the doctor seems to suggest that it was 30 years ago, so it could very well be an author mishap. And of course, we have Five Nights at Freddy's AR, and its Faz Facts, which included the mention of how Fazbear's Twisted Pizza recipe was voted most yummy by 6 out of 10 children in every survey from 1988 to 1993. And in 1993, the most dangerous profession in the United States was actually night security guard. But, according to the developers on this game, this should be taken with a grain of salt, given they were cut for unknown reasons. Okay, let's get into actual hard evidence. In the week before, pages that the Unwithered Truth didn't believe were meant to be in this book, they mentioned how Ralph's daughter Coppelia was 11, about to turn 12, as of the story taking place, and that those recordings were back when she was born, which given Freddy's has only been open since 1983, add 11 years and you get 1994. Then again, Phone Guy also says the animatronics have been performing for 20 years, which would place Five Nights at Freddy's 1 in 2003. However, this method mixed with the real-world calendar data from FNAF 2 placed its date on Friday the 13th of November 1987. That would most likely mean Scott made FNAF 1 taking place on a Friday the 13th as well. However, the closest date is actually in 1992, and the median of these 2 years would be 1993. But you need more proof, don't you? Something more definitive than cut content in median years. Well, what if I told you this was confirmed years ago? The community just never really thought about it. You know, when I released the first game over a year ago, I was amazed at how quickly everyone found every bit of lore in the story. Then, the same happened with Part 2. Fans and YouTubers dug in and found everything. Game Theory did an incredible video on Part 2, getting almost everything right. And taking a look at MatPat's videos from around the time, he continued to state that Five Nights at Freddy's 1 took place in 1993. Need more proof? Around the same time, Scott confirmed there was a way to make the complete timeline as of the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, which to me says the answer to when Five Nights at Freddy's 1 takes place had to have already been told to us in the story or solved by the community at that point. And to be completely honest, what I think a lot of people forget is that when the original game came out, it didn't have a long set of lore intended from the very beginning. Scott just wanted to write a story as he went and wanted to create something the community would appreciate, and I doubt when the game took place actually crossed his mind. And just like the name Golden Freddy or the eventual inclusion of Sparky the dog in the series, I think Scott fannily adopted this year as when Five Nights at Freddy's 1 took place, not giving it another thought, hence why he never seemed to make a reference to it ever again. And sure, there are slight continuity errors, however, those are all from the modern day, where new authors are being handed only small amounts of information to go off of, and likely that does not include the definitive date of when Five Nights at Freddy's 1 takes place. I honestly feel like when it comes to these older concepts, they already have been solved, which is the only reason Scott never went back to explain what they were, and that due to this community being obsessed with the past, we saw puzzle pieces for a completely different puzzle and thought that it was for this puzzle that was solved years ago. But we really didn't need that answer to begin with. With that being said, I feel like the community should take a look back to the way that Scott has behaved throughout the years and the way that he's responded to the community to understand a large chunk of this series, because the note that MatPat was almost right could end up solving a lot more questions that people have forgotten about for years, and getting rid of incorrect ideas such as Dream Theory ever being right, but that's a conversation for another day. If you've enjoyed the video or agree with me, let me know by liking the video. If you disagreed, let me know why in the comments below, and subscribe to stay up to date in case videos going over those things that MatPat was almost right about comes out. Remember, this was just a theory, and I will see you all again next time. Please go watch the Unweathered Truths video, it was incredible. Matane.